They called her the Dragon Ice Queen behind closed doors because of how dreadful she was. In the prestigious fashion atelier on Bond Street, London, her name was whispered with fear. Lady Victoria Ashworth. Beautiful, successful, and ruthless as a winter storm. She had built her empire stitch by stitch, but somewhere along the way, she had forgotten how to be human. In 6 months, she had fired 12 seamstresses. Some left in tears, others packed their bags in the middle of the night. One had thrown her sewing scissors on the floor and walked out barefoot, vowing never to touch fabric again. Then Emma arrived. Small, quiet, wearing a faded cardigan and carrying nothing but a canvas bag with her few belongings and letters from the NHS hospital. She wasn't there to impress anyone. She wasn't there to make friends. She was there because her son needed surgery, and this job paid more than anywhere else would take her. What Emma did in that fashion house didn't just save her son's life. It melted the ice around Lady Victoria's heart. The Ashworth Atelier stood like a Georgian jewel on Bond Street. Inside, the air hummed with the sound of industrial sewing machines, cutting tables gleaming under crystal chandeliers. Bolts of silk, tweed, and cashmere lined the walls like colorful soldiers. But beneath the beauty, tension crackled like electricity before a storm. At the center of it all was Lady Victoria Ashworth. At 38, she looked like she had stepped off the pages of Vogue. Tall, blonde, always dressed in her own designs that fit her like a second skin. Her office sat on the top floor, floor-to-ceiling windows allowing her to watch everything below. Her employees moved like dancers afraid to miss a step, because missing a step meant facing her tongue, sharp as the finest needle. Victoria didn't just give feedback, she destroyed. She didn't just correct mistakes, she humiliated. In her world, perfection wasn't a goal, it was the minimum requirement. And in 6 months, 12 women had discovered they couldn't meet that standard. But Victoria wasn't born cold. Once upon a time, she had been Vicky from Manchester, the girl who learned to sew on her nan's old singer machine, the girl who dreamed of dressing royalty while mending torn school uniforms by lamplight, the girl who had trusted the wrong partner, lost everything, and rebuilt from nothing. Somewhere in that rebuilding, she had decided that kindness was weakness, that trust was foolishness, that the only way to stay on top was to never let anyone close enough to push you off. When Emma walked through the glass doors that Monday morning, nobody looked up. They were tired of learning new names, tired of training fingers that would be gone in 2 weeks. The floor supervisor simply pointed to a sewing station in the corner and muttered, "You'll start with alterations. Lady Ashworth is upstairs." Emma nodded silently. She unwound her scarf slightly, revealing gentle eyes and worry lines that told stories of sleepless nights. She sat at the machine, threaded the needle, and began to work. Her hands moved with quiet precision. She had one reason for being there. Oliver, 7 years old, lying in a hospital bed with a heart that worked too hard and couldn't keep up. The doctors said surgery could fix it, but private surgery cost money she didn't have. 3 months, she whispered to herself as she guided fabric under the needle. Just survive 3 months for Ollie. She was hemming a cream-colored dress when she heard them. Heels. Sharp, purposeful, angry. Click, 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 down the stairs. The entire workshop fell silent. Machines stopped humming. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Lady Victoria appeared like a storm in a burgundy suit, her hair pulled back in a sleek chignon, pearls catching the light.
Her eyes swept across the room, taking inventory, looking for flaws. They landed on Emma. "New girl," she said, her voice carrying across the room with crisp authority. Emma looked up, hands still. "Yes, ma'am?" "Stand up when I'm addressing you." Emma rose slowly, the cream dress still in her hands. Victoria walked over, examining the work. She picked up the dress, held it to the light, checked the stitching. The hem was perfect, even, straight, professional. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Almost surprise, almost respect. Then she dropped it. "The thread is wrong," she said coldly, though it wasn't. "Use ivory, not cream. Do it again." Emma didn't argue. She simply nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "And next time, press the fabric first. I don't tolerate wrinkles." The fabric hadn't been wrinkled, but Emma just said, "Yes, ma'am," again. Victoria turned and walked away, heels clicking like a countdown. Behind her, she left silence and Emma quietly unpicking perfect stitches to start over. From across the room, Mrs. Fletcher, the senior seamstress, whispered under her breath, "She won't last. Too quiet, too soft." But what Mrs. Fletcher didn't know was this. Emma had buried her pride in a hospital corridor 2 months ago, begging doctors to save her son's life. She had cleaned offices where they treated her worse. She had slept on floors and eaten once a day so Oliver could have medicine. She wasn't soft. She was tested steel, wrapped in gentleness.
First came the impossible deadlines. "I need 20 alterations by tomorrow," she announced one evening at 4 p.m., dropping a pile of clothes on Emma's table. The other workers gasped. It was impossible. But Emma just nodded and started working. She stayed until midnight, her small desk lamp the only light in the darkened workshop. She finished 18. The next morning, Victoria came downstairs to find the completed work folded neatly with a small note. "Ma'am, I finished 18. The remaining 2 needed special attention. They will be ready by noon. Emma." Victoria stared at the note. Perfect handwriting. No excuses. No complaints. Just facts and a solution. She crumpled the note and walked away. Next came the criticism. Victoria began finding fault with everything. A stitch was too loose, a hem was uneven, colors didn't match. Most of it wasn't true, but she said it anyway. Waiting for anger, waiting for tears, waiting for the inevitable resignation. But Emma never fought back. She just listened, nodded, and quietly fixed whatever Lady Ashworth pointed out, even when it didn't need fixing. Even when everyone in the room knew it was perfect.
"Why doesn't she argue?" Victoria asked herself one evening, standing in her office watching Emma work late again. Why doesn't she defend herself? What she didn't know was that Emma had learned a hard truth in hospital waiting rooms. Pride is a luxury you can't afford when someone you love is dying. Every insult she swallowed was medicine money. Every unfair criticism she accepted was another day of treatment for Oliver. 2 weeks passed. The other workers began to respect Emma's quiet strength. They started bringing her tea during breaks. They shared their lunch when she forgot to bring her own. They saw something in her that reminded them why they had started sewing in the first place, not for recognition or praise, but for the simple satisfaction of creating something beautiful with their own hands. But it was Mrs. Fletcher who finally spoke the truth everyone was thinking. "That girl," she said one evening as they locked up, "she's not trying to impress Lady Ashworth. She's trying to save somebody." The words found their way to Victoria's ears through the workshop gossip network. That night, she stood at her office window long after everyone had gone home, watching the lights of London flicker like stars. For the first time in months, she felt something she had forgotten how to feel: curiosity about another person's story. The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon. Victoria had been in meetings all morning, dealing with a difficult client who wanted a complete wedding party outfit in 2 weeks. She was frustrated, tired, and looking for someone to blame. She found her target when she walked through the workshop and saw Emma training a new girl at the cutting table. "What are you doing?" she snapped. Emma looked up calmly. "Teaching her how to cut patterns, ma'am. You said we needed to train her." "I said train her on basic alterations, not cutting patterns. You're not qualified to teach pattern cutting." It was unfair, and everyone knew it. Emma's pattern cutting was some of the best they'd seen, but she just nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I'll stop." But Victoria wasn't finished. The day's frustrations bubbled over like a kettle left too long on the hob.
In fact, she continued, her voice rising, I'm tired of your attitude. Coming in early like you're better than everyone else. Working late like you're showing off. Acting like you're perfect. The workshop fell silent. This was it. This was how it always ended. This was where they quit. Emma stood slowly, her hands calm at her sides. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Not anger, but pain. Deep, quiet pain that she carried everywhere but rarely showed. Then she spoke, her voice soft but clear. I'm not trying to be better than anyone, ma'am. I'm just trying to be good enough for my son. Victoria paused. What? My son, Oliver. He's 7. His heart doesn't work right. The doctors say they can fix it, but... Her voice caught slightly, then steadied. I work hard because every day I'm here is another day he gets to live. I'm not showing off. I'm just scared. The words hung in the air like fabric on a line. Delicate, honest, undeniable. Victoria stared at her, and for the first time in years, she saw herself. Not the successful businesswoman, not the fashion icon, but the girl who had once worked 3 jobs to pay for her nan's medication. The girl who had sewn until her fingers bled because every pound mattered. The girl who had been alone and afraid and desperate. She opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. So she turned and walked away, leaving Emma standing in the middle of the workshop, surrounded by the quiet support of women who understood what it meant to work for love instead of money. That night, Victoria sat in her empty Knightsbridge flat, staring at a photo of her nan, the woman who raised her, the woman who had taught her to sew, the woman who had died while Victoria was working 18-hour days building her empire, too busy to visit. I became what I swore I'd never become, she whispered to the photograph. I became the kind of boss who forgets that workers are people with stories. She thought about Emma's quiet dignity, her refusal to fight back, her willingness to absorb cruelty for the sake of love. And she thought about her own journey, how somewhere along the way, protecting herself had turned into hurting others. For the first time in years, Victoria cried. Not the angry tears of frustration, but the healing tears of recognition.
The next morning, Emma arrived an hour early. She pressed all her fabric before starting. She organized her thread by color and weight. She checked every seam twice before moving to the next step. By the time the other workers arrived, she had already finished 2 alterations.
You came early, said Sarah, the girl at the next station. I want to do good work, Emma replied simply. Just be careful. This place, it's not about good work. It's about surviving Lady Ashworth's mood.
Right on cue, the heels started clicking, but this time they were slower, more controlled. Lady Victoria walked through the workshop wearing a black suit that looked like it cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her mobile was pressed to her ear. "I don't care what the client says," she spoke into the phone with clipped precision. "If they want cheap, they can go to Primark. If they want Ashworth quality, they pay Ashworth prices." She ended the call and looked around the room. Her eyes landed on Emma's station. 3 perfect alterations sat folded neatly, ready for collection. Victoria picked up a blue blouse, examined the sleeves, checked the buttonholes. Flawless. But then she noticed it. A tiny loose thread, barely visible, hanging from the inside seam. It wasn't a mistake. It was excess from where Emma had reinforced the stitching for extra durability. But Victoria's frustration from the phone call needed somewhere to land. "What is this?" she said loudly, her voice cutting through the workshop like a blade. Emma looked up, confused. "Ma'am?" "This," Victoria held up the thread. "Sloppy work. Careless finishing." Her voice rose higher. "Do you think this is acceptable? Do you think our clients pay premium prices for amateur hour?" The workshop fell deadly silent. Even the machines seemed to stop humming. Emma stood slowly. "Ma'am, I can fix." "Fix?" Victoria's laugh was harsh, brittle. "You think you can just fix everything? You think working early makes up for incompetence?" In one swift motion, she swept her arm across Emma's station. The 3 perfectly altered garments scattered to the floor. Buttons rolled across the polished wood. Hours of meticulous work lay in a crumpled heap. "Start again, all of it. And this time, try to remember you're working for Ashworth, not some backstreet tailor shop." Emma stared at the mess, her face pale but composed. The other seamstresses watched in horror. Mrs. Fletcher's hands trembled over her own work. But Emma didn't cry. She didn't shout back. She simply knelt down and began gathering the scattered clothes, her movements careful and deliberate.
"I'm sorry, ma'am," she whispered. "I'll do better." Victoria stood there, breathing hard, waiting for the satisfaction that never came. Instead, she felt hollow, empty, like she'd just broken something precious that could never be properly mended. She turned and walked away, her heels echoing in the terrible silence. What Victoria didn't see was Emma's hands shaking as she smoothed out her wrinkled sleeve. What she didn't hear was the barely audible whisper that escaped Emma's lips. "I'm sorry, Oliver. Mummy's trying." But Mrs. Fletcher heard, and later that evening, after everyone had gone home, she would make a phone call that would change everything. The next morning brought London fog and an unusual quiet to the workshop. Victoria came downstairs at her usual time, expecting to find Emma frantically trying to redo the previous day's work. Instead, she found her station empty, clean. No fabric, no thread, no sign that anyone had been working there. "Where's the new girl?" she asked Mrs. Fletcher sharply. Mrs. Fletcher looked up from her sewing machine, her face unusually stern. "She's gone, Lady Ashworth." "Gone? Did she quit?" "In a manner of speaking." Mrs. Fletcher set down her work and faced her employer fully. "She's in hospital." "Hospital? What happened?" "Collapsed on her way home yesterday. Exhaustion, the doctors said. Hasn't been eating properly, hasn't been sleeping, been giving all her food money to pay for her son's medication while working herself to death for a boss who treats her like dirt." The words hit Victoria like physical blows. Mrs. Fletcher continued, her voice steady but cold. 23 years I've worked for this company, watched you build something beautiful. But yesterday, watching you humiliate that girl for a thread that wasn't even a mistake, that wasn't the woman who hired me.
That was someone I didn't recognize. Victoria opened her mouth to speak, but Mrs. Fletcher wasn't finished. You want to know something else? That amateur work you destroyed? The blue blouse. I examined it after you left. That girl had reinforced every seam, added extra stitching to the stress points, finished the hems with French seams instead of the standard ones we usually do. It was the finest work I've seen in 2 decades, and you threw it on the floor like rubbish.
The workshop had gone completely silent. Everyone was listening now. She didn't quit, Lady Ashworth. She's fighting for her life in St. Mary's Hospital. And her little boy? He's been crying for his mummy for 3 days straight, not understanding why she won't wake up properly. Victoria felt the room spinning. Which hospital? St. Mary's in Paddington, Ward 7. Though I doubt they'll let you see her. Family only, they said. And since she's got no one else— Mrs. Fletcher's voice broke slightly. That little boy is sitting in the children's ward, waiting for his mummy to get better, while the doctors say she needs rest, proper food, and less stress. Victoria turned without another word and walked toward the stairs, but Mrs. Fletcher's voice stopped her. Lady Ashworth, the older woman's tone was gentler now, but firm. If you're going to that hospital, don't go as her boss. Go as someone who owes her an apology she may never live to hear. Victoria drove through London traffic like a woman possessed. Her hands shook on the steering wheel. Mrs. Fletcher's words echoed in her mind. Fighting for her life. Hasn't been eating. Giving all her food money. How had she not seen it? The way Emma's cardigans had gotten looser each week, the way she never ate lunch, the way she'd started bringing smaller and smaller bags, as if she owned less and less. St. Mary's Hospital loomed gray and imposing in the afternoon drizzle. Victoria had been to many hospitals for charity galas and photo opportunities, but never like this. Never with her heart hammering against her ribs, never with guilt weighing her down like stones. Ward 7 was quieter than she'd expected. The nurse at the desk looked up with professional politeness that chilled when Victoria introduced herself. "You're from the fashion house." The nurse's tone could have frozen fire. The place that worked her into collapse? Victoria winced. Yes, I need to see her. I'm afraid that's not possible. She's barely conscious, and when she is awake, she keeps asking for her son. The stress of seeing you might— She paused, clearly choosing her words carefully. Might not be beneficial to her recovery. Please, Victoria's voice cracked. I need to apologize. The nurse studied her for a long moment. Room 712. But if she gets upset, you leave immediately. Victoria walked down the sterile corridor on unsteady legs. Through the small window in the door, she could see Emma lying in the hospital bed. She looked so small, so fragile. An IV drip fed into her thin arm. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow.
But it was the little boy that broke Victoria's heart completely. Oliver sat in a chair beside the bed, his small hand holding his mother's fingers. He was reading aloud from a picture book, his voice soft and determined. "And then the princess found her way home," he read carefully. "She was very tired, but she was safe now, and everyone was happy. The end." He looked up at his mother's still face. "Mummy, did you like that story? The nurses said stories might help you wake up." Victoria pressed her hand against the glass, tears streaming down her cheeks. This was what she had done. This was the cost of her cruelty. She was about to turn away when Oliver looked toward the door and saw her. Their eyes met through the window.
He didn't know who she was, but something in her face must have told him she was connected to his mother. He got up and walked to the door, opening it slightly. "Are you here to see my mummy?" he asked with the innocent directness of children. Victoria knelt down to his level, struggling to speak through her tears. "Yes, sweetheart. I work with your mummy. Are you her friend?" The question hit Victoria like a physical blow. I don't know, Oliver. I hope I can be." "She talks about her work sometimes. She says her boss is very important and very smart, but also very sad. Are you very sad?" Victoria stared at this 7-year-old boy who saw more clearly than any adult she knew. "Yes, Oliver. I think I am very sad. Mummy says when people are very sad, they sometimes forget how to be kind. But she says everyone deserves kindness, even sad people." At that moment, Emma's eyes fluttered open. She turned her head toward the door and saw Victoria kneeling beside her son. For a moment, confusion flickered across her face. Then recognition. Then something that looked almost like understanding. "Ma'am?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Victoria stood up, her legs unsteady. "Emma, I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry." Emma tried to sit up, and Victoria rushed forward without thinking, helping to adjust her pillows. "You don't need to apologize to me, ma'am," she said softly. "I failed you. My work wasn't—" "Stop." Victoria's voice was firm but gentle. "Your work was perfect. It was always perfect. I was the failure, Emma. I was cruel and unfair and—" She took a shaky breath. "Mrs. Fletcher told me what you've been doing. Going without food so Oliver could have medicine. Working yourself to collapse while I criticized you for nothing."
Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I just wanted to do well. I needed this job so badly." "I know, and I nearly destroyed you for it." Victoria pulled a chair close to the bed. "Emma, I want to tell you something about that blue blouse. After you collapsed, Mrs. Fletcher examined your work. You hadn't made a mistake. You'd made it better. That loose thread I screamed about? It was from extra reinforcement stitching. You were making our clothes stronger, more durable. And I threw your work on the floor like it was worthless." Oliver climbed back onto his chair, looking between the two women with the serious expression of a child trying to understand adult complications. "You threw Mummy's work on the floor?" he asked Victoria directly. Victoria turned to him, her heart breaking all over again. "Yes, Oliver, I did. And it was wrong. Very, very wrong." "Did you say sorry to Mummy?" "I'm trying to." Oliver considered this gravely. Then he reached over and patted Victoria's hand with his small fingers. "Mummy always says sorry is the first step, but the second step is doing better next time." Victoria looked at this wise little boy, then at his mother lying exhausted in the hospital bed, and made a decision that would change everything. "Emma," she said, her voice stronger now, "I'm going to do better. Starting right now."
Monday morning came with London drizzle and the usual workshop bustle. But something was different. Victoria didn't storm downstairs with criticism ready. Instead, she walked quietly through the workspace, observing without commenting. She watched Emma guide a young apprentice's hands on the sewing machine, watched her share her tea with a colleague who had forgotten hers, watched her work with the same quiet excellence that had become her trademark. At lunch break, Victoria did something she had never done before. She walked over to Emma's station.
"Can we talk?" she asked quietly. They went to the small break room, two women from different worlds carrying different kinds of pain. Victoria sat across from Emma, her hands folded. Her usual commanding presence softened into something almost vulnerable. "Tell me about Oliver," she said. Emma's eyes widened with surprise, but slowly, gently, she began to speak. About her son's smile that could light up a room, about sleepless nights in hospital corridors, about choosing between rent and medicine, about the surgery that could save his life if she could just hold on long enough to afford it. Victoria listened without interrupting, and as she listened, she remembered her own story, her own struggles, her own reasons for working until exhaustion. When Emma finished, Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I owe you an apology. Several apologies. I've been treating you like the enemy when you're the strongest woman in this building." Emma shook her head. "Ma'am, I'm not strong. I'm just desperate." "No," Victoria said firmly. "Desperate people give up. Strong people endure. You've been enduring me for weeks, and I've given you every reason to leave. That's not desperation. That's strength." That afternoon, Victoria called her accountant, then her solicitor, then the private hospital where Oliver was being treated. By evening, she had made arrangements that would change everything. The next morning, she called Emma into her office. On her desk sat a letter and a small envelope. "You're being promoted," she said simply. "Workshop supervisor, better pay, private health insurance for you and Oliver, and," she handed her the envelope, "an advance for Oliver's surgery. Consider it an investment in the best seamstress I've ever worked with." Emma opened the envelope and gasped. More money than she had ever seen in her life. Enough for the surgery, the recovery, everything.
"Ma'am, I can't." "Yes, you can, and you will. Because that little boy needs his mother, and this workshop needs you. Not just your hands, but your heart. You've reminded us what we're really doing here, creating beautiful things for people we love." Emma began to cry. Not the quiet tears she had been holding back for months, but the relieved sobs of someone who had been carrying too much weight for too long. Victoria stood up and did something she hadn't done in years. She hugged someone. Not a business handshake or a polite air kiss, but a real embrace, woman to woman, mother to mother. "Thank you for not giving up on me," Victoria whispered, "even when I gave up on myself." 2 months later, Oliver ran through the workshop on small but steady legs, his surgery scar hidden beneath a bright blue jumper. The women gathered around him, offering him buttons to play with and scraps of colorful fabric. He laughed and hugged them all, but saved his biggest smile for the tall lady in the beautiful dress who knelt down to his level. "Are you the one who helped my mom?" he asked Victoria with the direct honesty of children. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "No, sweetheart, your mom helped me." The workshop had changed completely. Laughter echoed where fear used to live. Women shared skills and stories instead of walking on eggshells. Orders were filled with joy instead of anxiety. And at the center of it all was Emma, leading not with authority, but with the same quiet strength that had transformed everything. One evening, as the sun painted the London sky gold and pink, Victoria sat with Emma on the workshop balcony. They watched Oliver play with paper airplanes made from pattern scraps. "You know," Victoria said, "I used to think success meant never showing weakness, never letting anyone see who I really was underneath the suits and the attitude." Emma smiled gently. "And now?" "Now I think success means creating something beautiful together. And sometimes the most beautiful thing you can create is a place where people feel safe to be human." Oliver ran on over with his paper airplane, tugging on Emma's cardigan. "Mum, look how high it flies!" They watched him throw it into the evening air, where it soared on the warm breeze before landing softly on a nearby rooftop.
"Just like us," Emma whispered, watching her son's joy. Sometimes you have to trust that if you let go, you might just fly. Victoria nodded, thinking about the walls she had torn down and the bridges she had built. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop protecting yourself and start protecting others. As the lights of London began to twinkle and the workshop settled into peaceful quiet, both women understood something profound. That healing happens not when we become invincible, but when we become willing to be changed by love. And in a Georgian building on Bond Street, where fear used to live, now there was family. All because one woman refused to break, and another woman learned that breaking isn't always about falling apart. Sometimes it's about breaking open to let the light in. The Ashworth atelier became known throughout London not just for beautiful clothes, but for beautiful humanity. And visitors would often comment on the unusual atmosphere, the way workers smiled, the way they helped each other, the way even the boss sometimes sat on the floor playing with a little boy while his mother created art with needle and thread. They said you could feel the love in every stitch, and they were right. If Emma's story touched your heart, share where in the world you're reading from, and remember, sometimes the strongest people don't make noise. They simply refuse to break, and in their refusal, they heal the world around them, one quiet act of courage at a time.